every time you make a goal, you can only make a goal if you know what the problem is,
Mm-hmm.
right? Always start with the problem. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me. This is How, your occupational therapist, and welcome to OT Conversations. So in this episode, I have been contacted by one of students who's going to be at some point, at some time, that she will be the future of occupational therapy. And she's been having some difficulties or just needed some advice when it comes to her work in the university. And is it cheating by consulting me? I don't think so. I think it's a good thing that the person is trying to obtain some wisdom and knowledge from those who know. And we'll have this conversation, and let me patch her in. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, is this Becky?
Yes.
Hi, Becky. Hey, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Okay, what's happening?
So I have a assignment for uni, and I just wanted to talk through sensory integration because I know that in my presentation that I did previously, I think I misinterpreted sensory integration with some other things. So I just wanted to clear that up.
Sensory
So we'll get it right
integration.
this time.
So
Yeah.
is this assignment in your university, it relates to this, does it?
So the assignment is we're in groups and we have to come up with a long-term aim and a short-term goal relating to a case study that we've been given. And then from the goal, create an intervention.
Right.
The case study that I have, the person has sensory issues from a mild stroke that they suffered,
Mm-hmm.
as well as some other things. So I wanted to incorporate sensory integration. Also, we have to, within our group, because we all have the same case study,
Right.
we all have to do different interventions and make it quite different. So I'm going down this route.
So there is one particular case. And what was the case? Can I be reminded of it, please?
So the case study is a 35-year-old woman. She is severely sight impaired, been losing sight over a period of 10 years. She has type 1 diabetes, recently been discharged from hospital after having a mild stroke. She's living at home, but she has some symptoms from that, so fatigue, sensation loss, and memory problems. She has an 11 and an 8-year-old children, lives with her husband. She doesn't work, and she doesn't feel like she needs to work. So I'm assuming that her husband would earn
Be
enough
well
money.
off.
Yeah.
Yeah, rock and roll.
Yeah.
And then an 11 and an 8-year-old child. So assuming that this woman had the first child at around 30, she'd be in her 40s-ish. Oh, did it say the year? How old she was?
Yeah, she's 35.
35, so even earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, so 35-year-old young woman, and she had a stroke, and they say it's mild.
Yeah.
And the problem with the mildness was that she has a sensory problem.
Yeah, so fatigue, sensory loss, and memory problems were the main ones.
Okay. Yeah. And that's about the case, is it? Or there's more? So she's with children. She doesn't work. Husband doesn't need to work. Type 1 diabetes. Understandably, she's losing her sight because diabetes will impair the vision.
Yeah.
And is there yeah?
So it says that prior to her admission for the stroke, she was already finding her usual activities increasingly challenging due to the vision loss. She used to really enjoy gardening and baking cakes. And following the recent admission, she's struggling to cope with running a home and looking after children. Her family live in Poland, so she can't really have much support from them because they're there. She's here. And her partner works long hours and is exhausted when he returns home, only wanting to eat a meal, watch television, and go to bed.
That's what the husband wants to do.
Yeah, and they have little time to talk about our challenges of our lives as a result of her condition. And her husband is worrying about her sailing health.
And yet he doesn't want to help out.
I don't think he can because he works long hours. That's what I've got in the case study.
I see. Okay.
She
That's
used
it?
to work as a doctor's receptionist, but she's happy at home and doesn't need to go back to work. So I would take from that she doesn't financially, they're okay with her not working.
Okay.
She also goes to a Catholic church every week, but has found it difficult to attend the mass. But that's important to her. Also taking her children to and from school. And she would like to become better friends with the other parents. Other people in my group are doing because we all have to have the same long-term aim, but different short-term goals and interventions.
Okay.
A lot of their goals and interventions are around social reintegration into the community and making friends with the other parents, going to church.
So that's addressed already.
Yeah.
Okay.
And someone else is focusing on the memory side of things.
What were they going to do in the memory? You don't know yet.
I think she is going out to the shop, but making it very memory based. So trying to remember what she needs to get and things like that, but also using the side of the community in it. So I thought I could do
Something to do with sensory.
Yeah. So my initial goal, so we had to come up with individual goals for a formative assignment, and then we've been given feedback from that. My initial goal was so the case study was lean or base cake independently, taking pacing breaks as needed, using a perching stool provided by the OT by her daughter's birthday in 4 months' time. But then I've since changed that and developed it into lean or base take independently, using sensory rehabilitation techniques given by the OT by her daughter's birthday in 4 months' time. I've taken out the part about the perching stool and the pacing because after speaking to my lecturer, I think I was trying to incorporate too many things, which then would have been difficult when I wrote my assignment. So I'm just going to focus on one thing, being sensory integration.
Interesting. Okay. Here is my take on things. Okay. And I don't want to discourage you very early on. Sensory integration, when you're talking about sensory integration, this is all about sensory processing. And it's all about understanding the sensation that is going through the system. Usually with the principle of sensory integration, it was targeted in pediatrics. And it was Jean Ayres who was the proponent. And it started with horses, really. What happened was there are these horses that are very hard to tame. And for some reason, when they put some deep pressure in it, there was a calming effect on the horses. And then they thought maybe it would be something suitable for children as well. So this was targeted for children with developmental disorder and dyspraxic disorder. So sensory integration, the understanding is that if you normalize the sensation, will have an effect on a person. For example, if a child learns to climb up the stairs, they won't stop climbing stairs because everybody is sensory seeking until that skill is mastered. Once a child learns to whistle, they'll carry on whistling every day until they get tired of it. And if you do hopping or skipping on one leg, a child will just do that over and over and over again. So that is the sensory integration. So when we're talking about sensory integration for this scenario, because it's adult, sensory integration would not be the frame of reference for that. Unless she presents with some form of hypersensitivity to auditory stimuli, and in which case, if she's hypersensitive, then set up some relaxation place at home where she will be hearing some low tune, low tone, low rhythmic tone. If she is getting overly stimulated. I think for adults, there are
Mm.
times when you get so stressed, so overly stimulated, you just want to get away from the busy place.
Mm.
And you want to have a time for yourself. So these are the salient effects of sensory integration. So unless she has that, you can advise a time for her at home, like a me time, where all the stress is out, and then she goes into her own bathroom, dim the light, put on some music, which would be calming, and which would you give some lavender type of scents, which is olfactory. So that would be calming, and then you dim the light, and that would make it calming as well. So if she goes into a bath, for example, that neutral warmth is calming, and that will relax the system and the body as well. So that's what it would be. So if we are talking about sensory integration, that's how you would apply that. So technically, most of the well-being centers out there, the aromatherapy, the massage therapy, because if you do deep pressure, that is calming. And you don't give a massage that is fast, isn't it?
Mm.
Massages are slow strokes, deep pressure, and these are all calming and inhibitory in nature. That would be sensory integration, and that's how it would affect the scenario in case you get stressed. Maybe the husband will need a sensory integration, isn't it? Get
Yeah.
a place where he gets relaxed, because if he's probably much more relaxed, then maybe he can help out. Interesting, isn't it? So there you go. And if you're an occupational therapist, you're not just addressing her problem, you're addressing the entire context, on which case helping the husband will you'll enable him to help her. Okay. Okay, so that's the scenario. Now, the other thing is sensory, all of these sensory problems that she has. And they say it's mild. So we don't know. We need to quantify the mildness.
Mhm.
Is it?
They just, in the case study, it literally just says a mild CVA, and he has some residue symptoms of fatigue, sensation loss, and memory problems.
Fatigue.
They don't specify specifically what under those. So I think with that, then I can just change it to suit what I want it to be. Because obviously in the real
Okay.
world, you investigate that a bit further and
Uh-huh.
see what specifics. But they just give us an overview of the case study, and then we can change it
Okay.
and add things as we need.
So we're addressing ADLs, right? So the fatigue is something. So it's mild. So the endurance is not very, it's not on tip top. We can use, what are your views on the fatigue?
I think it's a big thing because it's going to affect everything she does, because
Mhm.
she's having to run the house and look after 2 children because her
Mhm.
husband's working so much. So a lot of the pressure's on her, and all of the social integration stuff that she wants to get back to doing, like going to church,
Uh-huh.
that would obviously need energy, and the
Mhm.
fatigue be impacting that. So I
Okay.
suppose that is the route I could go down.
Yeah, fatigue. Because when you have the fatigue, there are ways on how to address this fatigue. You have two types. You have to restore, and fatigue generally is low endurance. So that's one way, meaning you need to plan with her and come up with a way on how she can manage the fatigue so that she can slowly increase the fatigue. So we want her to self-manage this. And then you can think about some activities, some chair-based activity that she can do, which would be part of her day-to-day routine. Start with that, because it's not a full disability yet. Fatigue is not yet, it's not yet classed as a disability in this sense. It's just a residual problem. And if it's a new stroke, maybe it's something that you can do. If I were the therapist and I'm at home, I would go and I'll talk to her, find out the areas on where she gets tired. I need to understand this activity level, the routines, the habits, what's causing this. So yes, she's had a stroke. Maybe again, the sugar level will have an effect on that. So the diet will be very much of an influence on this. Because if you have unbalanced or uncontrolled sugar level, sugar is energy. So that can contribute to fatigue. So make sure that you get the referral to nutritionist, just making sure that everything is balanced. And then I will come up with a targeted exercise for her, which would involve low resistance, but with increasing period of time. Okay. And you need to design this and you need to plan this. It can start as a few weeks of training program. Start with a week one, just sit down and just do these gentle stretches in the middle of first thing in the morning, gentle stretches and a few bits more. So that is something, because when you do that and when you have a means to carry on with your exercises, then that can hopefully improve your activity tolerance. Okay.
Yeah.
And fatigue. That's one way. So you want her to be able to self-manage it, but you need to have a program where from your first input, maybe after 4 weeks, you review every now and again. But
Okay.
your success in this fatigue, how you would measure it is you can ask her, you can use the COPM, Canadian Occupational Performance Measure.
Yeah.
You can identify the areas on where she gets tired. And then, for example, say things at home, for example, things that she does at home. She's saying, say, cooking is difficult. Okay. So you can get her to score that. What's your performance like? 1 to 10, 10 being very good and 0 not good at all. And then she'll put a score on that. Say 3. Okay. And why is it 3? Because she gets tired. Okay. So you give your system, your project, your exercises, and then you can come back and ask that same question again and see whether it has an impact, whether it has increased. Yeah. So that's one way. So that's restoring fatigue, because one way you need to restore it. In the meantime, while fatigue is improving, you need to give her means on how to make things easier for her. And so perching stool is not a bad idea. Yeah. Because what a perching stool would do, what do you think a perching stool would do?
Reserve her energy.
Exactly.
Not having to stand up for long periods of time in the kitchen, for example.
Exactly. So there you go. So the problem is the patient has fatigue, and the problem is that she's engaging she has very little energy. And when she does her personal care or domestic ADL tasks, it's very taxing for her that it consumes a lot of energy. So what you want her to do is patient will have means to perform ADLs while complying with some energy conservation techniques and strategies. Having a perching stool is one. You can advise her on that, okay? Perhaps the other thing would be utilizing a different technique when she's cooking. Would you consider meal planning using slow cooker?
Yeah.
Has that come across your mind?
Yeah.
So that when the husband comes in, so maybe exploring how she does the meals. Does she cook every day? If you cook every day, it means you'll have to shop frequently.
Yeah.
So that means you may have to plan meal planning throughout
Yeah.
the week, So you plan, you can explore doing batch cooking with her.
Yeah.
When you do the batch cooking, doing that, wow, imagine the amount of time that will save her. But it will take some change of habits and routines, because if she's not used to that, then you need to coach her into doing it. You need to plan it together. Okay. So that's one. So we've addressed the fatigue, restoring the fatigue. We have addressed the prevention and, again, making things easy around the house. And that is you're improving on the quality of performance, because fatigue is one measure for quality. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with less fatigue, how are you going to deal with fatigue? At the first instance, compensate. Yeah. Modify, use adaptive aids, use special techniques. And then while you're doing that, carry on with restorative intervention. But you want her, because it's in the community, you want her to be self-managing this. Okay. And then eventually she won't have to rely on those compensatory strategies anymore. Okay. Is there anything else? So sensory, anything else with the sensory that we're thinking of?
I thought depending on obviously what type of sensation, but if it's sensory loss in her hands and fingers, then that could make administering her insulin quite difficult. So I suppose that's why I was looking at the sensory side of things, because if she's not then able to have the fine motor skills to administer her insulin, then she might not be doing it as regularly.
Mm-hmm.
And that would obviously cause a lot of issues.
She still has to have the insulin, regardless of the sensory problems. So if that is that important and she's not doing it, it doesn't say that she's not doing the insulin, doesn't it?
It doesn't specify anything about it. It just says he has it.
Because if you can't do it with one hand, use the other one too. If the strategy is there are some types of insulin delivery system where you just plunk in and just press a button, and the drivers, the syringe drivers that are just so easy to use, you can do that. That's simplify it. With sensory, you can give her some home instruction program really on how to manage the sensation or impairment with sensation with the hands. Again, it will normalize itself, but you need to put the hand into different textures where she can feel. It's like stroking on a rice box, for example, to get that sensation normalizing, or exercises of trying to feel items with her hands, or stereognosis activities. The thing with sensation is the more you use your hand, the more it gets hypersensitive. So you need to give it a break so that it normalizes itself. Yeah. It's like when you rub a part of your skin. First, it was okay, but you rub it, it becomes very hypersensitive. So really give her some activity programs for that sensation on the upper limb. Again, we don't know the extent of the problem with the sensation. If it is that the extent is that she can be at risk when she is using or cutting, because it will have an impact. She doesn't know what she's touching, so there could be a risk hazard on when using chopping boards and knives. Then you can explore other means, compensate, educate at the end of the day. Once she knows about it, then she'll learn how to compensate about that. And then it will naturally normalize. The intervention so those are some of the restorative interventions. So it's sensory motor approaches really, rather than sensory integration. Am I making sense?
Yeah, so that wouldn't be sensory integration, you'd call that.
No, sensory motor approaches.
So a rehab approach.
By definition, right? Sensory motor approaches would be, you can look at the principle of ROOD, ROOD.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the ones that talk about this is, look at Trombley and Pedretti. It's there. There are texts about how to do sensory retraining, because it's not sensory integration. That's the problem. She has proprioceptive subsystem. She's already a well-functioning adult, so it should not be a problem. The problem here is a sensory problems because of the stroke. So it's sensory retraining, sensory motor approaches. Yeah, because when you say rehabilitation approach, by rehabilitation, you talk about getting a person to do things regardless of the problem. For example, if somebody can't walk straight and far, use a wheelchair. That is a rehabilitative approach. If you have difficulty, say, dressing, for example, and you can't reach, then use a sock aid and reachers. That's a rehabilitative approach. Yeah. Now, rehabilitative approach can either be restorative or compensatory. Yeah. With her, you need to restore it. Yeah. So you'll have you as the therapist, and you'll get her through paces of activities where she'd be feeling lots of things with the hand, stroking towels, anything else, putting the hand in varying temperatures, hot, cold. So that's restorative input that you can do. Okay. But the thing is, for a functional rehab, you have to educate her, because at the end of the day, it's all about safety.
Yeah.
Yeah. It won't be sensory integration, because sensory integration would means you'll have to get her through the paces of swing and bolsters and trampoline, lots of gross motor activities. Yeah. So that's more on the sensory integration. And it's not just localized problem with sensation too. So with sensory integration, you have the entire child not wanting to wear woolen clothes because it's very prickly.
Yeah.
So you need to give the child a lug roll, for example. You get them rolling into a blanket roll. So more proprioceptive input that will inhibit the tactile hypersensitivity. So with her, because it's stroke, it's really not sensory integration, but it's sensory motor approaches. And then what else? So it's restorative, and then you get her, empower her, you coach her on how to self-manage it. So the baking alone, geez, you can put a goal, learn how to bake in a with less energy, then you can, it's all compensatory, isn't it? It's all adaptive. Rather than mixing, find a mixing bowl.
Using a rehab approach, but also using both restorative and compensatory at the same time.
Yes. There are many ways on how we can argue with this for your paper. We just need to set it up in the right way where we can present it, isn't it? There are two things. We go and look directly at the ADL problems. And with those ADL problems, for the time being, you need to find ways on how she can do those ADLs with ease. Because at the moment, it's coming up that it's not that she can't do them, it's that she's doing it with difficulty, isn't it? So what you want her to do is to be able to do it with ease.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how is she going to do it with ease? You'll have to compensate. You'll have to modify the treatment. Yeah. You have to modify the strategies or the way she engages on those ADL tasks. So modify through change of routines, change of process. If you remember the parameters, which is independence, safety, and adequacy. So at the moment, she's independent with ADLs. That's fine. But some of the problems with the domestic care and roles is that it's difficult. And how can you need to do it? You can't wait to improve before you do it, isn't it? You can't wait to improve physically before you do those things. Life doesn't stop.
Yeah, definitely.
So what you can do is initially teach her how to do it with ease, and you'll have to use the modified techniques. So if you remember again, the treatment interventions under Ecology of Human Performance, RAMPs. So you are restoring, that would be on the next stage. We're not altering, she's not going to a care home. Modify is something that you'd be doing, okay? So the problem with ADLs is, her problem is the difficulty, adequacy, so difficulty and fatigue. How are you going to address that? At the moment, you are going to modify because she's already at home, okay? Once all the modifications been done and she can do it, then you can concentrate now on carrying on with the restorative side of things. That exercise program that you will give her, that will improve the endurance, and that is a restorative treatment. Those advice that you would give her to manage the upper limb sensory impairment, those are restorative treatment.
Yeah.
Okay. Exciting.
Because I need to come up with a goal.
Okay.
I think, so I'll stick with the baking because that's one of her meaningful occupations. I think I'll probably use a rehabilitative approach. I wanted to ask about the Ecology of Human Performance. Would you say that's a frame of reference?
It is.
Yeah.
No, it's a model. No.
Because I was trying to look it up actually.
No,
but
it's not. It's not. It's more of a model.
Yeah.
It's a model on how you see a person, how you're dealing, but it's not a frame of reference. A frame of reference is when you do the rehabilitative approach where you would compensate, and then that is a frame of reference. When you try that sensory retraining, that's sensory motor frame of reference. That's the frame of reference of biological. You will restore. There are techniques on what you can do to treat the sensory problems. With the endurance and your exercise program that you will give her, then that will still be that's a frame of reference because you're addressing the endurance and you're giving her the technique on how to improve. So a frame of reference is all about what's your reference in terms of addressing the problems. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because model of human occupation is a model and it's also a frame of reference. So there are some techniques on that one. So with the goal, right? If that is a problem, if that's your goal, you can have a goal about she will be able to make a cup or will make a cake with ease. That can be a goal because the problem is she has difficulty, making a cake because of low endurance. Then how would you do it? How are you going to change that problem? She'll be able to make it with ease and safer. And how are you going to make it with ease? You teach her with some compensatory strategies, perhaps utilizing a perching stool for those things. You can say that all of your goals, every time you make a goal, you can only make a goal if you know what the problem is, right? Always start with the problem. So like, for example, she's having problems with meal preparation. Okay. Zero it in. If you teach her, so your technique would be to teach her with you're going to have some meal planning activities. Yeah. Why do you want to do that?
So she can meal prep more easily and more independently, so reserving her energy.
Exactly. So you can actually do that. So she's having difficulty preparing meals for the entire week. Okay.
Yeah.
And you want her to be able to prepare meals with ease so that it will allow her and at the same time maintaining and preserving her energy. How are you going to do that? Plan it with her, teach her with some of the compensatory strategies again. And these are all rehabilitative approach. Yeah. This is a rehabilitative frame of reference. When you plan, when you adapt, when you change things, you compromise, you still get things done. That is a rehabilitative approach. I think the concept in this country when it comes to rehabilitative approach is like fixing the body.
Yeah.
That's one of it. Yeah. But also, after you fix the body and you can't fix it, how did you go about with fixing the ADLs, the routines, the habits? What's that approach? That is the rehabilitative approach. So going back to your frame of reference, if the problem is endurance, your frame of reference is biomechanical frame of reference, where you deal with strength, endurance, range of motion, edema. If your problem is something neurological in nature and you want to restore that, then that would be sensory motor approaches. So that sensory impairment that she has for the upper limb, that is sensory motor approaches. And that's on the technique of Rude, not so much on Bobath because it's more movement, but it's Rude that's doing that sensory motor interventions and treatment. Now, if you want her to carry on with the roles and routines, you're getting her, with Moho, you're addressing Moho, the roles and the routines of being a mom. That's a bigger story, isn't it? It's not specific enough. And you need to compensate and compromise. Again, that's a rehabilitative approach, but under the Moho frame of reference as well. Okay. Now, the ecology of human performance, the strength of that is that it's saying that if it's suggesting the ramps, the restore technique that you will do, it's suggesting the modify, it will address the supportive intervention that you will do and the preventative intervention.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope I have not made it even more complicated.
No, you haven't. No, I think
Okay.
I was getting a bit confused with the difference between sensory integration
Yes.
and sensory motor approaches.
Yes, it would be a sensory motor approaches, definitely. Not sensory integration. You will have sensory integration for pediatrics.
Yeah.
You can have, there are some sensory integration for adult, but this was given and directed to mental health practice.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are under prolonged antipsychotic medications, and then the effect of that is that they don't move. They tend to have Parkinsonian problems.
Mhm.
So what you do is, as an OT, you give them gross motor sensory integration. So you play volleyball, you play netball, you play loud music, you go disco, you do gross motor activity, because once you do that, then it's going to address it. But with her, you're not going to give her any of those, because you'll tire her even more.
Yeah. So I need to use a model. And I think at uni they teach you the CMOP, MyoHo, they one, but I quite like their ecology of human
Yeah,
performance.
you can use that.
I would use that instead of
Yeah.
the MOM or
Yeah.
CMOP.
Yeah.
So that would be my model.
Yeah.
And then it would be biomechanical and rehabilitative approach.
Yes. Okay. So with her scenario, with your case, yeah. So what's the problem at the moment? The problem is her low endurance, that she cannot do a lot of the things that she needed to do at home because of the fatigue. Yeah. And that's natural. It is what it is. She has a problem. You got to live with it, isn't it? But she also has to do her job as being a mom. The treatment there is it's modify, isn't it? On the ramps. So modify. How do you modify? Use adaptive aids, change the techniques, change the strategies. Yeah. That would do that. You educate her, that would do that. Okay. And then you want her to self-manage the endurance by giving her exercise. That is now restorative intervention. Yeah. So you're treating a few things here now. And then the other thing would be that upper limb problem. So if she has sensory impairment and you educate her about safety precautions for the upper limb, that becomes a preventative intervention. Yeah. To be safe using kitchen activities or kitchen appliances while preparing meals because of the sensory impairment, that is a preventative intervention. Okay. But then if you teach her some activities as well that will restore the sensation on the upper limb, that is a restorative intervention as well. Yeah. Now, the restorative approaches or frame of reference that you'd be using, what were the problems? The endurance, that is biomechanical frame of reference. The sensory approaches the restorative techniques, that would be sensory motor approaches. So those are some of the techniques that you would be using. Okay. There's no issue about the will and the volition. So you're not going to use cognitive behavioral. There's no faulty behavior because of faulty thinking, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's a good thing that you're not addressing the memory. Because if we add in the memory, then yes, you will have to be using modify approach as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
The question is, can you really get a person's memory back? Isn't it? I don't think you can. Because if you can probably make me smarter, isn't it? And you can't do that. And with that is now cognitive disability frame of reference, which would have been Allen.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. It's really helpful. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you for calling me, and thank you for considering seeking advice, because I enjoy this too.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye. There we go, guys. Wow. That was a very long conversation, but it's a very fruitful one. It's amazing. And I hope you learned a little something from that conversation. It's a very good one, and it's always a pleasure to be helping students. So if you enjoyed this and you found it useful, talk to your friends about it or give me a holler. There are ways on how you can find me on the internet. It's right.conversations@gmail.com, I believe. And there we go. Until next time, bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, talk to your friends and colleagues about it. Like it, subscribe, share, and do what you can to appease whatever algorithm that is at play. Just remember, guys, anything you do matters and has an outcome. Until next time, bye.